Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Physically, mentally, they are just burnt out.
What do we want?
Government action!
Rallying for relief, BC nurses demand more help after 2 brutal years of the pandemic. Also,
we know that some regulated health professionals have views about the vaccination.
vaccine laggards. Well, many BC health professionals are fully vaccinated. Our top doctor says others have a lot of work to do. And BC poultry farms tighten up protections to try to keep avian flu out of their flocks.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Anita is away this week. They are burned out by the pandemic and they want more help. Hundreds of BC nurses took those messages to the foot of the legislature today. They're demanding more help for government to address a shortage of nurses and patient safety. And as Mira Baines reports, it comes as the union heads into contract talks later this year.
What do we want?
Government action!
Nurses in BC delivered their message to the province, respect nurses. The event is part of National Nursing Week, but this year it's less of a celebration and more of a show of solidarity.
It's taking a toll on them. Physically, mentally, they are just burnt out. They're getting called in on their days off. They are having to extend their shifts.
Greywall says the BC government could do more by providing more funding for a bridging program so that licensed practical nurses can become registered nurses. She suggests there's not enough programs for retention and recruitment. The union says the contract for nurses expired on March 31st and will be negotiating a new contract with the BC government.
We're still bound by the previous contract. We will start negotiations after our bargaining conference, which takes place in October.
A survey done by the BCNU of its members found 82% said their mental health had worsened over the pandemic. 35% of nurses were considering leaving the field in the next 2 years because of the pandemic. The opposition Liberals questioned what the BC government is doing to deal with the nursing shortage.
Stories of anger, frustration, heartbreak. When will the minister end the empty rhetoric, stand up, acknowledge the reality of nurses today in British Columbia, and do something to fix the problems?
The province's health minister says the COVID-19 pandemic has put additional pressure on the healthcare system.
In the past week, for example, we had a level of absence in the system largely due to COVID-19. That was almost twice the ordinary level, including during the last year, and that has presented exceptional challenges on the ground.
The Ministry of Health recently announced $12 million to streamline the process for internationally educated nurses to get registered and licensed faster in BC. The BC Nurses Union says more needs to be done. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
BC's top doctor, meanwhile, held her first COVID update in several weeks today. The focus was on how many regulated health professionals in BC are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Dr. Bonnie Henry says 94% are completely dosed, but there are some laggards. Take a look. Surgeons, dietitians, and physicians led the way with 98% fully vaccinated. Below that, though, roughly 78% of chiropractors have been fully vaccinated, and just 69% of naturopaths have had 2 doses of vaccine. Henry says she expects to see a surge of COVID cases in the fall, but doesn't expect to return to public health orders.
This virus is going to be with us for some time. We do not yet know if all of us will need another dose of vaccine come the fall, or if protection from the 3 doses will carry most of us through, and only some people will need another dose. Those are the things that we are planning for the future. We're watching closely, and we're planning for how that will happen now.
Henry says there will soon be a full list of vaccination rates among regulated health professionals. Vancouver Coastal Health, meanwhile, is taking a leap to help people diagnosed with lung cancer. The health authority is launching the Lung Evaluation and Assessment Program. Running as a 2-year pilot out of VGH, the program will see a dedicated nurse navigator support patients and loved ones through the cancer treatment process. A nurse navigator is a staff member with cancer care expertise. The goal is to ease the emotional burden for people living with lung cancer. Avian flu continues to spread across Canada at a concerning rate. That is prompting poultry farmers here in BC to ramp up their safety measures. The CBC's Zara Premji joins us live with more on the spread and what's being done to stop it. Zara, first, what are the numbers now?
Well, Dan, there's been an estimated 1.7 million birds euthanized or killed by the virus here in Canada. While most of those deaths have been in Alberta and Ontario, BC has seen its fair share of the spread as well. So while there's no current risk to British Columbians buying locally produced eggs and chicken, experts say there are simple steps to take to stop the rapid spread. It's transmitted to livestock through wild birds like ducks and geese, often through shared food sources like bird feeders. So people here are asked to remove outdoor bird feeders and bird baths.
It's much more concerning if the virus jumps from humans to other humans. That would actually be the beginning of a new pandemic, and who really needs to encounter yet another pandemic.
But he says the risk remains low for that, and eating properly cooked turkey, chicken, and eggs remains safe.
That's good news for the low risk for humans, but what are farmers here doing in BC to avoid outbreaks, Zara?
Well, one farmer in Abbotsford actually says in his 25 years of poultry farming, he's never seen anything like this. So he's put his farm into quarantine and taking specific precautions to protect his birds.
When you go into a barn with animals, that you're not using the same attire which you use when you go shopping. You change your clothes. So therefore, you're not bringing any unwanted disease into your barn.
So as you can see, he dons the full protective equipment when around his chickens and is asking customers who come to pick up eggs to stay in their cars and far from the coops. Now, the province says the infection rate really follows the migration of wild birds from the U.S. to BC. So the hope is this spread will actually stop by the end of this month when they stop migrating. Dan.
Zara Premji reporting live. Thanks very much. A BC township is on the hook for $350,000 after it sold a man's property over unpaid taxes and didn't tell him. Owner Anthony Morgan owed roughly $6,700 in property taxes when the Okanagan township of Spalumcheen, just west of Armstrong, decided to auction his property off. Morgan bought the 3.8-hectare land for $160,000. 7 years later, Spalumcheen sold it for just over $11,000 and didn't tell him. Now, a BC judge says the township deserves to face, quote, significant consequences for failing to meet its legal obligations. Vancouver police have made a second arrest in last weekend's killing in Crab Park. Police were called to the park Saturday morning after police say the victim, Andrew Wadden, was assaulted by two men. Yesterday, 18-year-old David Bentel was charged with second-degree murder. The first suspect, 26-year-old Eric Kim, was charged with second-degree murder on May 8th. Anyone with information on the attack is asked to call police. And homicide investigators are investigating two deaths in Abbotsford. IHIT was called in after two bodies were discovered yesterday morning inside this home on Arcadian Wayner's Selden Road. Police have deemed the deaths suspicious and say they appear to be unrelated to the Lower Mainland gang conflict. Anyone with information or footage from the area in the past day is asked to contact police. A community has rallied around a New Westminster family at risk of being deported to Mexico this summer. They're calling on Ottawa to stop it.
We are an honest and hardworking family. We came to this country like many migrants, looking for new opportunities and a better quality of life.
That was the couple speaking yesterday at Lord Tweedsmuir Elementary School. Contreras was detained there by immigration officers after dropping off her daughter last November. She was born in Canada. The family came here more than a decade ago as refugee claimants, fearing for their lives, but the initial claim was denied. Canada Border Services says it has a, quote, legal obligation to remove those inadmissible to Canada.
This situation exposes the racism and exclusion in our immigration system. Whenever we advocate against policies, exclusionary policies, the government always points towards applications for permanent residence on humanitarian and compassionate grounds as this is a solution.
Their deportation date is set for July 8th. Supporters are calling on Canada's immigration minister to process their residency applications before they're removed. BC-born musician Jacob Hoggard was back in court today hearing testimony from a second woman who accuses him of sexual assault. The former frontman for the band Headley has pleaded not guilty to the charges. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson has more from Toronto, but first a warning, this story does contain graphic details.
On day 7 of the sexual assault trial of Jacob Hoggard, the second of his accusers took the stand. The Ottawa area woman, whose name can't be revealed because of a publication ban, shared her story with CBC News in 2018. She said she met Hoggard at a downtown Toronto hotel in November of 2016, and that it was there that he proceeded to rape her, an ordeal she says lasted for hours. She said she told him no, stop, and that he's hurting her, but that he was just patting my head and telling me that I was a good girl and to be quiet and it would be over soon. She said Hoggard spat on her and choked her with 2 hands and that she worried she would die. She, like the first accuser, also said the encounter left her bleeding. The 2 testimonies shared other similarities of alleged assaults too.
The eerie similarities here is that Mr. Hoggard, once they enter the hotel rooms, becomes Jekyll and Hyde, becomes a monster, confuses consensual, non-violent sex with the oral, vaginal, and anal rape that these women detail.
Inconsistencies between the accuser's account to the police back in 2018 and her testimony today formed the basis of the defense team's cross-examination this afternoon. Hoggard's attorneys also questioned why she didn't leave the hotel room, which was unlocked, or call for help. Her response: you can't leave the room when you're being raped. The cross-examination continues tomorrow. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
We are in the middle of a colder spring right now, at least here in BC. And now scientists are warning that could usher in a potentially dangerous flood season ahead. The BC River Forecast Centre says cold temperatures are delaying snowmelt in parts of our province, and it's leading to larger accumulation of snowpacks in places with deep snow. But the danger comes if temperatures rise dramatically in the coming months. They say these temperature swings could lead to flood watches and warnings coming more suddenly. Well, a lot of people nervously watching that situation. Meteorologist Collete Kennedy is in today for Johanna Wagstaff. Temperatures obviously and rain a factor in flood risks. What are you watching, Collete?
Yeah, exactly, Dan. When we're seeing things slow to warm up, so we've got this delayed snow melt, and then we have the risk of a very wet June or seeing the temperatures spiking. Well, let's start with that first part of the equation, the temperatures, and then we'll get to the rainfall. And certainly just kind of looking ahead over the next few days, we're really not seeing anything dramatic. And in fact, I know there are some folks who would like to see things warming up a little more significantly, but into the Okanagan with some drier conditions at times, then you see the temperature up. By the time we get to Thursday, though, that rainfall that will be moving in means we'll be lucky to see that 11 in Vancouver may get stopped at just 10. And then even pushing forward towards the end of the week, a few sunny breaks, maybe a little warmer, but really 12 is what I have in my forecast for Vancouver on Friday. And you'll even notice just mid-teens that we're talking about further into the interior. In fact, Saturday, look at those numbers, just highs around 12 degrees. Where we will see a bit of a warm-up really comes towards the end of the week and beginning of next week for the lower mainland. So give me a second, we'll get to that 7-day forecast and have a look at those projections. Dry, yeah, just with the isolated or scattered shower activity that we see into tonight and early tomorrow. Heavier rains to the north along the coast with windier conditions there, but as that system makes its way down through the day tomorrow, we'll find that rain becoming more organized and enhanced across the island, and then later in the day tomorrow becoming more organized as it pushes into the lower mainland and even for the Sunshine Coast. And as that continues to spin, we continue to get the wet weather on Thursday, probably Thursday night, and then Friday. That's where I'm hoping we begin to see some sunny breaks coming through before more wet weather comes back at us again. Now, initially, because it's just light in nature, we're not seeing the main system or the core getting here. This is what we're just looking at into 9 p.m. on Wednesday, but watch this as I roll it forward. Heavier rains for the outer coast of the island, and just looking at some of those numbers, 30 or even projections towards 35 millimeters. So also something to be watching. And even tonight, you know, we're looking at some wet flurries for Whistler before that changes over to rain showers. So 7 for tonight. We reach that towards morning, and 13, we'll see if we can get there tomorrow because of that heavier rain kind of holding off. That should help a little bit, a bit breezier closer to the coastline. Thursday, those cooler numbers, and into, I said there was a bit of a warm-up, right, coming towards the weekend. How about Sunday into Monday? Yeah, that's what it's going to take us till about Monday before we see that normal high, Dan, before we're really reaching that seasonal norm.
Okay, thanks, Collete. To Ukraine now, where more than 3,000 civilian deaths have been confirmed since that war began in late February. Today, the United Nations says the real number is much higher, likely. The CBC's Briar Stewart has the story from Kyiv.
Liza Chernichenko points to where 4 bullets pierced her legs and feet. She was shot 10 days ago while trying to save 2 men who were injured in an attack in the Donetsk region. The 15-year-old got behind the wheel of a car and started driving them to the hospital. As I was coming out from under the bridge, there, like chess pieces, were many landmines. After making it through that, she says the Russians started shooting.
What was going through your mind as you were driving out?
There was no fear, there was no shock, she said, just a determination to go forward. Doctors put a steel plate into her right leg, and on her left foot, she's now missing her baby toe. But she survived when so many others haven't. At least 1 person was killed yesterday in Odessa when missiles hit a warehouse and this shopping mall. Since the war began, the United Nations has recorded nearly 3,400 civilian deaths, but officials warn the true number is much, much higher.
The big black hole is really Mariupol, where it's been difficult for us to fully access and to get fully corroborated information. We estimate that there are thousands of deaths that have happened there, civilians who have died due to hostilities.
Mariupol resident Alina Beskrovna sheltered with her mother and cats in a basement during the first month of the war.
This is part of Grad missile that was fired right into our house.
When they fled the city 2 weeks later, she took the missile fragment with her because she wanted hard evidence of the weapons Russia is using.
But when I look at those pieces, I think of the civilians who were just murdered.
Beskrovna is in Denmark and waiting for a visa to come to Canada, but she hasn't been able to reach her father since the end of February. He also lived in Mariupol. Searching for him and for answers isn't easy in a now shattered community. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Kyiv.
As an outgunned Ukraine defends against the much larger Russian army in the east, NATO allies are holding military exercises in the Black Sea near the coast of Romania. The CBC's Chris Brown was among those invited on board a ship as special forces carried out their drill.
We're on a Romanian naval ship just off the coast of Romania in the Black Sea. We've been invited to watch and, as you can hear, listen to a military exercise. That's a helicopter hovering overhead, and off to the stern of the ship there's a number of smaller vessels containing special forces members. They've come from the United States, they've come from Britain, and they've come from Romania as part of Operation Trojan Footprint. It's a huge military exercise taking part all across the eastern flank of this alliance, and this particular portion is the maritime section of it. What we've seen in the last few months involving NATO and deploying its forces on its eastern border with Russia is almost unprecedented. There's now some 40,000 troops at the ready, facing Russia. That's 10 times more than what there were before Russia invaded Ukraine back in February. The whole purpose of these exercises is to ensure that not only are all these countries working together and being highly coordinated, but also even within the militaries, even within Romania, for example, that the people who fly the helicopters and the special forces and so forth are all talking to each other, because as we've seen as part of this war in Ukraine, that's been one of the big criticisms of Russia's army about the poor performance and the lack of coordination. We are, in fact, not that far from Ukraine here. 120 kilometers up the coast is Snake Island. It's been one of the most hotly contested pieces of land in Ukraine. And of course, NATO is not part of this war. And the message is NATO's troops are close by, they are well trained and ready to intervene if necessary. Chris Brown, CBC News, in the Black Sea off Romania.
Last year, Ottawa created special immigration measures to help skilled Hong Kong residents work here in Canada and apply for permanent residency more easily. It was partly due to the response to the deteriorating human rights situation there and increasing crackdown on pro-democracy activists. But as Matthew Kupfer explains, some applicants are worried that a small detail could disqualify them.
The 2019 protests in Hong Kong and the subsequent national security law raised concerns from critics and the Canadian government about human rights in the territory. CBC News is protecting the identity of this woman who left Hong Kong because she's concerned about political reprisals. She and her boyfriend, who was arrested but not charged during the 2019 protests, were relieved to come to Canada when open work permits became available. But now they've hit a stumbling block on their path to permanent residency.
We were able to get an easier pathway, but we cannot get through to the end. And it's like we're kept in the middle of somewhere, and then we don't know what is the next step or what should we do next.
That's because applicants for permanent residency from Hong Kong need to have a post-secondary qualification that's no more than 5 years old. They both got their degrees in 2016. While the federal government has said they can apply in other ways, she's worried about delays.
We are still scared, and we don't want to just go back to Hong Kong.
Community Family Services of Ontario is trying to help people navigate the Hong Kong pathways. They say the concern is real.
The 2016 and 2017 graduates are sort of stuck between two doors. So this is the first gap that I would see, that I think it's, in terms of policy, there is a calculation error.
While open work permits got people to Canada faster, this immigration law expert says it was unlikely the situation in Hong Kong could be addressed with temporary status. Jamie Liu would like the process streamlined.
It really puts people in very precarious and temporary situations where there's no certainty, and that they're having to wait and apply for a cascading line of applications.
The federal government says the policy allows people to extend their temporary status within Canada while other applications are being processed. Matthew Kupfer, CBC News, Ottawa.
Scientists at the World Health Organization say there are 348 suspected cases of unexplained severe hepatitis in children around the world. The agency is investigating whether there may be any link to COVID-19. The CBC's Natalie Collette now on some of the cases here in Canada.
Officials are reporting 7 cases of severe acute hepatitis at Toronto's Children's Hospital. Sick kids. These cases were identified between October 1st, 2021 and April 30th, 2022.
Large children's hospitals, such as ours, regularly but rarely see children with severe hepatitis or inflammation of the liver. So is this new in terms of the causation? We just don't have that information as yet. Are we seeing more numbers than before? The honest answer is, with 0 to 2 cases per month at the most, that would be consistent with what we've seen before.
The Public Health Agency of Canada has not yet provided specifics on how many cases are being investigated Canada-wide. Hepatitis refers to the inflammation of the liver. It is rare among children, and it's typically caused by a family of hepatitis viruses. But it also can be triggered by alcohol use, exposure to toxins, or other pathogens. So researchers are trying to figure out what is the root behind the cases that they are seeing right now, including theories potentially linking it to infections from the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
Is this a COVID-related illness, for example, a post-infectious inflammatory syndrome, or is this related to another virus like adenovirus? We don't know yet. It's not quite clear. This will get solved. It's just premature.
Researchers are also working to determine if the cases we are seeing here in Canada are related to the unexplained instances of hepatitis popping up around the world.
I think it's important to highlight that there are 6 countries only at present that are reporting more than 5 cases. For all the remainder of the countries, it is less than 5 cases.
On Friday, the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention said it's looking into 109 cases. 14% of those children required a liver transplant. 5 children died from their illnesses. In the UK, officials there haven't ruled out yet the role of potential COVID-19 connection or any toxicological component, but this is still very much a mystery, and it's likely to take some time before it is solved. Natalie Collada, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, BC's Provincial Health Services Authority tells CBC News no cases of severe acute hepatitis have been reported at BC's Children's Hospital, suggesting the phenomenon has not yet reached our province. PHSA says it is aware of the suspected hepatitis cases in other parts of Canada and is watching the situation closely. Thank you for joining us on CBC Vancouver News at 6 online. You can always find our newscast online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is set for 11 o'clock after the National this evening with Zara Premji. Take care.